Well, thanks for coming down to Miami. Appreciate it. Get you out of the Beltway for a bit.
It's great to be here.
Now, you worked at DHS before CISA existed, and then CISA, and then National Security Council, and now ONCD, the Office of the National Cyber Director. Maybe give us the short version. What is the ONCD supposed to do in this government pie we have?
So the Office of the National Cyber Director was established in July of 2021 with the swearing in of Chris Inglis as the inaugural National Cyber Director. So the National Cyber Director serves as principal advisor to the President on cybersecurity policy. The office itself now has built up to about 80 folks. The office is the policy coordination body for cybersecurity, the nation's cybersecurity posture. So that's the overarching piece of that. And then, we work very closely with the other elements of the White House and with the interagency. Two of the focus areas for the National Cyber Director is really this issue of federal coherence, getting the government to work together, and also looking at ensuring that we align aspirations and resources. So those are two of the big focus areas.
It's funny you mentioned that because that was the line I pulled out of your mission statement. ONCD will champion federal coherence across U.S. government and cyber policy. We see a lot of overlap between what DOE does and what CISA does, sector-specific, what your office does, and other organizations putting out studies, NIST and all that. Does your organization play a role in kind of dealing with those disputes when they don't agree on what the right thing is supposed to be done, or how does that get settled?
So I wouldn't call them disputes. I think there is a lot of resources that are out there, and there's a lot of activity that is good activity. The issue is how do we synchronize, how do we synergize that, and how do we work together to advance the security? So that's a big piece of what we do. Now, I will say that we also work very closely with other elements of the White House. The National Security Council, the National Space Council, the Office of Management and Budget, the Defense Policy Council, or the Domestic Policy Council, all of these different elements of the White House that work together and then work with the interagency. So whereas, the Office of the National Cyber Director is really looking at that cybersecurity posture of the United States and the policy related to that. We work very closely, for example, with the National Security Council, which is focused on coordinating national security policy across a range of domains, including cyberspace. We work very closely. The National Space Council, yet another one, space policy and specifically space cybersecurity, which is a concern. We are leading, along with the National Space Council and with the National Security Council, efforts to address cybersecurity for space systems. So we're working through all of those things. Now, when we talk about the interagency, we are working on developing policy. The interagency, DOE, CISA, and others are executing policy. So CISA, for example, main functions defend the federal networks, the federal space of the networks and critical infrastructure, and then also coordinating policy and coordinating activities relative to critical infrastructure security as well.
A lot of the people in the audience are much more wired in to the Washington scene than I am, and I hear stories from a lot of them about, I won't name names, but about disputes between various people and organizations and such. That I was just wondering, does NCD have kind of the final vote, or are you just a player among many? Because that was something I was never really clear on structurally.
So we work together within the office of the Executive Office of the President in the White House that has all those different elements, the National Security Council, the Office of the National Cyber Director, other policy councils. We work together within the Executive Office of the President in a collaborative way to reach consensus and direction to really drive advancements in security.
Okay, I won't push again on that. I saw that in the implementation plan, and we talked about this on the phone before this was set up, that one of the items, Initiative 6.1.1 in the National Cybersecurity Strategy Implementation Plan, which I guess is really a big thing that the office has done. They've come out with the National Cybersecurity Strategy, National Cybersecurity Strategy Implementation Plan, which the audience knows pretty well. But one of the things that was interesting was that you're supposed to annually report progress and effectiveness on implementing the National Cybersecurity Strategy. That'll be about a year old in June, so what should we look forward to there?
So a couple of things real quick. The National Cybersecurity Strategy is really what we consider to be the North Star for what our focus is for cybersecurity efforts for the nation. I would note that a year ago this week was when the National Cybersecurity Strategy was released. So in the intervening year, in the 12 months since then, there's been a lot of activity. The implementation plan, as you mentioned, was released in July. It has 69 initiatives. Not every activity that is supporting our nation's cybersecurity efforts are in there, but we have 69 focused initiatives that we are really driving towards on a daily basis. So the Office of the National Cyber Director led the development of the strategy. We led the development of the implementation plan and are tracking and driving actions on that implementation plan. So the 69 or so, 69 initiatives that are formally listed in the plan, we are tracking progress on every one of them. We have 22 of 25, I think, which are either scheduled to be complete, that are scheduled to be complete now. About 88% are complete, and we're working very hard on the other ones. I would note that some of the initiatives that are in there are not short-term initiatives. They're going to go on. We're working on segments and milestones, and we are now developing the version 2.0 of the implementation plan, which will be released late spring, early summer, which will outline, what are the next steps. So we've accomplished some things, we've made some adjustments on others, and now we're looking at what are the follow-on activities that we've learned, or that we've learned and identified that need to be done. So you can expect that there will be version 2.0 in late spring, early summer, which will identify the progress that we've made on the initiatives to date, and then outline requirements and activities for the follow-on for the next year.
So potentially new initiatives or modified initiatives?
So we anticipate that there may be new initiatives that from activities that we've learned about, or that we have completed one initiative and maybe there's some follow-on activity that would be appropriate. That will be a new initiative. There may be other new initiatives that have come up that have been identified as things that maybe we didn't have the capacity or weren't ready to tackle during version 1.0, but now that we've progressed through, we've now developed a stance where we're ready to tackle additional initiatives.
The Cyberspace Solarium Commission had something where it was great. I thought it was a really good document, but when you looked at it, a lot of what they did was just create this new position, write this new paper, stand up this new organization or such. And I also noticed in what you had in this first implementation plan, and again, I think most people thought it was a good plan, and I'd agree. I thought the first draft was a good plan, but it seemed a little limited in that a lot of it was not results-based. It was like explore opportunities for software liability, issue an RFI on this, begin an initiative on this other thing. I mean, I would say probably 2/3 were programmatic kind of things. Can we expect in 2.0 to get more complete this task, deliver this thing that might actually have a metric tied to risk?
So we, in the initiatives that were in Implementation Plan 1.0, we have, as we've reviewed those initiatives, we are developing milestones and activities to ensure that we are actually progressively moving things forward. Software liability is an issue I think you just mentioned.
Yeah.
Certainly that is an area where, yes, explore it. You know, we wanted to make sure that the initiative is broad enough so that as we get the responsible agency, and by the way, we assigned a responsible agency.
Yeah, that was good. That was really good.
So there's a single point of contact, a single agency responsible for each initiative. So we wanted to give enough flexibility so that they can shape what is in that initiative and determine, you know, what milestones need to be met, what activities need to be met. So for software liability as an example, software security overarching is one of our key pieces that we're concerned about. I would back all the way up to, as you go back to Executive Order 14028, Section 4, the requirement for the development of software in a secure software development lifecycle, the requirement for government to purchase software or to acquire software that has been developed in that secure design lifecycle. That is a key piece. And then as we look at now, how do we, you know, what do we take from that, and how do we, as you're looking at secure software and software liability, what can we take from that? So in that initiative, yes, we're exploring that. I will tell you that we have activities that have been ongoing relative to that. The administration is committed to working with Congress to develop legislative action to incentivize development of software with more secure code, to incentivize that development. We are looking at development of a software liability framework. We have we're certainly engaged with some lawyers who are looking at that. There is a activity of law professors who are looking at developing a liability framework that will include a safe harbor for those entities that develop and maintain software to high standards. In other words, we want to raise the bar here and, you know, raise the standard of care to a higher level for the development of software through all of those other things I mentioned, through 14028, through Secure by Design, through all of these activities. That's what we want to do. And then certainly an incentive would be this issue of a software liability framework. So I will tell you that the White House ONCD is hosting a symposium of law professors later this month at the White House to review and try to work towards and have a conversation on that framework for liability. So it's a software liability reform symposium, which will be held later this month.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of what I was getting at. So that would clearly be a check mark off on the initiative, right? Because you would have explored it, and that would kind of be the next step then. Okay, what's our next milestone in this chart? So I don't want to make it appear that I think these initiatives were wrong, but to me they seem like first steps, and it's really interesting to see what the second and third step, when we can expect those and actually see some metrics.
So I think that you will find that you know, when we look at metrics on all of these pieces, you know, a lot of these are really output metrics, right? Yeah. As we're talking about metrics and milestone completion, we're tracking those very hard. I think that you will find that as we move into version 2.0, some of these items and these initiatives will mature, and we will achieve select milestones, and we will develop further follow-on milestones and activities, which will, I think, have better clarity in version 2.0 as we progressed.
Okay, let's dive into a few of these in the time we have left here. Regulation. Objective 1.1 says where there are gaps in statutory authorities to implement minimum cybersecurity requirements, the administration will work with Congress to close them. So what sectors do you see having gaps at this point?
Well, let's talk about regulations first.
Okay.
I mean, I think the issue of, you know, requirements. Let's talk about requirements, cybersecurity requirements. So, you know, it's been clear to the administration, it's clear in the strategy that the voluntary-only regime that we've relied upon for many years is really not adequate to meet the dynamic threat environment that we face. So there are, and those voluntary only standards or voluntary only regimes for requirements for cybersecurity have really resulted in uneven and oftentimes in some sectors inadequate cybersecurity protections. So there has been activity that has already been done, and that's kind of noted even in the strategy. The Transportation Security Administration, TSA, used its authorities, it had existing authorities, and applied cybersecurity requirements for aviation, rail, and pipelines. Those, again, were key pieces. Last week, the administration took several actions relative to the maritime transportation system. There was an executive order clarifying the role of the captain of the port as a cybersecurity leader, cybersecurity authorities within that domain of his area of responsibility, as well as issuing a notice of proposed rulemaking for cybersecurity requirements for the maritime transportation system, for the ports, for the vessels that come into the ports. So those were key pieces, and those were very important pieces. As we look at what other requirements are out there, where is there a need for additional cybersecurity activity? Certainly the water sector, the healthcare sector have been mentioned frequently as areas where there is a need for increased requirements or increased activity. As we look at regulations, though, we really need to look at, a couple of key things as we look at developing regulations, and that is that they are risk-informed, that they're performance-based, and that they are developed in consultation with the stakeholders who have the best knowledge of how to drive these things to the highest level. So that's part of what we've been doing. So I've mentioned a couple of sectors where there's an area of focus, but then we look at this harmonization issue and how do we harmonize regulatory requirements across the ecosystem.
And that was one of the initiatives too.
Yeah, and that is an initiative. We're directly involved with that initiative. That is one of the ones that our office actually has responsibility for. As I mentioned, every initiative has a specific agency or office that's responsible. Our office has the responsibility for regulatory harmonization for cybersecurity. And we're actively working that. We are in discussion. There is a forum, a cybersecurity forum of independent and executive branch regulators that actually meets. It's a community of interest. And we've had discussions about what are baseline requirements. What should the baseline requirements be for cybersecurity? So as I've mentioned, we see great value in a harmonization of this, of regulatory requirements for baseline cybersecurity, in part because it's going to drive the cost down, it is going to minimize the burden on both the regulated and the regulators, and it will help to ensure that if you are a regulated entity by multiple regulators, we want to get to what's called reciprocity. We want, if you've met the requirements for one regulator, that they will satisfy the requirements of another regulator to the maximum extent possible, recognizing that different regulators have different requirements, or perhaps have different requirements, but a lot of the attributes are the same. We want to avoid a regulated entity being asked one question by one regulator and a similar question by another. To the extent that we can develop a baseline of what those requirements are, I think it'll be advantageous to everyone. And I would say that one of the Rosetta Stone, I think that a lot of regulators look at is the NIST Cybersecurity Framework 2.0 came out last week. A lot of activity in the last week. Cybersecurity Framework 2.0 last week. A lot of great information in there, and that's what a lot of regulators are focusing on.
That leads me to a thought. You said a lot of information last week. And I noticed that I put out a Friday newsletter, and I have a hard limit of only 3 government stories a week. And I have a tough time. Actually, last week I had 4. I couldn't restrict it to 3. But there's so much information coming out. And a lot of it quite good, but a lot of it repetitive. A lot of, CISA is putting out, sector-specific agencies are putting out things, NIST is putting out things. How is an asset owner supposed to deal with this deluge of some guidance, some potential regulation? What would you advise them to do with this?
So one of the things that we've been working on very hard is that, and to the credit of CISA, the FBI, NSA, specifically those three agencies, if you look at a lot of the cybersecurity alerts and advisories that come out,
Yeah.
those are all joint bulletins. So they're available on each one of the websites, but they've all got joint seals on them. If you look at, for example, the guidance on the open source software security roadmap that CISA put out, again, looking across as a joint document. The principles for secure by design, which CISA put out originally in April of last year with an update in September, had, I think, 4 different agencies, a total of 17 national, U.S. and international agencies, all co-sealing that document. So there is a great effort to try to make sure that we have synergy of effort, synchronizing our messages, and ensuring that we have collaboration. It's one of the goals of the Office of the National Cyber Director, again, is that federal coherence and synergy of effort. But there is a lot of information out there, and different agencies put out things to different stakeholders, but we try to make sure that the overarching messaging is aligned.
Yeah.
Sector risk management agencies, are putting out information. DOE has some very great information. They put out information to their stakeholders. That's also put out more broadly to a wider range of stakeholders through those joint seal processes.
Just going back to the harmonization, so the Office of the National Cyber Director has a leadership role in that, in the harmonization effort. Who's actually going to generate this harmonized list? Is that something that CISA leads that effort, or is there another, or is that your group?
So that's a great question. We are, again, one of the things, we put out a request for information last summer. The responses came in October. On regulatory harmonization, we got a lot of input from OT stakeholders. We got a lot of input from energy, transportation, critical manufacturing sectors, all provided a lot of great information and inputs. The next step on that, we are synthesizing those inputs. We are having this discussion with that cybersecurity forum that I mentioned. We are now looking to develop what will be the next steps that will be an initiative in 2.0. So we are, one of the things that we have been working on is again, some sort of a framework that looks at the baseline requirements that are applicable across most sectors, those being developed consistent with existing frameworks and standards to include the NIST Cybersecurity Framework 2.0. And that will be, as we look at it, that will inform, all of this will inform a initiative update in 2.0.
Okay. Hitting another one, another initiative was the IoT Security Labeling Program, where this community deals with more industrial IoT, but it might fall under that same sort of thing. How is that going?
So that's going very well. The Federal Communications Commission was assigned responsibility for that program. They've developed and rolled out several months ago the proposal for the U.S. Cyber Trust Mark program, which again is a voluntary labeling program. They like to go ahead and make that a value-added program. They have done some preliminary work on that. There was last week or 2 weeks ago, speaking of what needs to be added into your list, they issued a proposed rule relative to standing up that program. The Federal Communications Commission members are scheduled to vote on that this month and move that program forward. So I think there's a lot of value in that program. Again, they need to shape it, but it's been similar to other programs that really are trying to identify what security, baseline security measures are in those IoT devices and industrial IoT devices. This is, again, part of what is intended to drive and shape market forces. If you have an opportunity to purchase a to be able to look at a device, whether it's a home router or anything else, and to be able to click on a barcode which takes you to a link and says, here are the cybersecurity features that are embedded in there. If you have a choice between buying that and buying one that doesn't have it, I think most Americans would say, I want to buy the more secure device, even if the cost may be, a little bit of a differentiator. But that secure by design feature and highlighting the secure by design and making sure that people are aware of what's in the actual device, I think, is a key piece.
Do you have a favorite initiative we haven't talked about?
I have several favorite initiatives.
Pick your most favorite.
Most favorite initiative, I think, is well, I've got several, but one of the ones that we are working on is actually secure internet routing. So, as we are looking at the whole scope of securing the structural integrity of the internet, which I think applies to a lot of the issues that you all are focused on, cyber-informed engineering, secure by design. Those pieces are key pieces. But we have to actually even go look at the investing in the ecosystem on which all of this rides. And so that's a key piece. We're working very hard on looking at secure internet routing and how we can take actions that are relative to that. That's a key piece. Space system cybersecurity is yet another one. It is a key issue. We talk about sectors that may have aspects where they need enhanced cybersecurity requirements. I'll mention space systems. Space systems, right now, the linkage between IT and OT and space systems is not as tight as it ought to be. The guidance on how to safeguard OT in space is not as strong as it needs to be. And the Vice President, we've been working with the National Space Council and the National Security Council to look at how to improve space system cybersecurity. And one of the aspects that we're looking at is the Vice President has now directed that there be a development of minimum cybersecurity requirements and standards for U.S. space systems. So there's an opportunity there. It's an identified need that we need to address. And again, looking at how do we address OT in space is another issue, and ensuring that that ecosystem from the terrestrial all the way to the space systems are actually secure.
I guess to end, I was curious how the S4 attendee here, who tends to be, advanced, understands the issue well, kind of often the go-to person when it comes to OT security in their organization. How should they, or should they even interact with ONCD? Or should they continue to focus on their sector-specific agency and go through that range? Or should there be anything they should look at to be communicating with your office?
So that's a great question. The primary interface is the sector risk management agencies and those key aspects. We're coordinating policy at a higher level. We have engaged with private sector entities who have thoughts, and we certainly are keen on public-private coordination and collaboration. We do engage with the private sector or with critical infrastructure stakeholders and providers. But again, one of those key interfaces is really building that relationship with the sector risk management agency. That is where, really a lot of the key piece goes. As I know we're running short on time, the one thing that I really want to emphasize for the group is, you folks all are very knowledgeable. You're engineers, you're policy people. The issue, the topic of the conversation here on creating the future for OT ICS security has never been more important than it is now. You all are aware of Volt Typhoon. You're all aware of what that threat is. And I think it's really important just to emphasize, on January 31st, the National Cyber Director and other cyber leaders testified before Congress. And the key piece I think that really resonates for this group is Volt Typhoon, cybersecurity, those cyber actors are not conducting cyber operations for necessarily espionage, financial gain. They are really now looking towards, actively getting deep access to our nation's critical infrastructure. So the OT systems and the ICS systems that control our critical infrastructure, the cybersecurity of those assets is of key importance to the administration, to our nation. I want to, first of all, just thank you all for the efforts that you are doing. Thank you for convening these folks, because I've looked at the agenda. There's so many great things in there, great discussion items. The government cannot do all of it, cannot secure the nation's critical infrastructure by itself. This is a collaborative partnership. We need the private sector. We need the expertise that you bring to the table that really will help us collaboratively secure our nation. Again, this is a national security issue. It's an economic security issue. We need to work together to address the challenge.
I should have asked you this in the green room, but are you going to be around at all today, or are you flying back right?
I'll be around today till about 4:30.
About 4:30. Okay, so that's great. So they'll have an opportunity to come up and say hi and
Absolutely.
and talk to you maybe during lunch or some other time. That's great. Well, thank you very much for coming down. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.